Hey, Sin in Space listeners, you may notice there's a lot of editing that went on in this episode. I have a hard time reading books right now because I don't have eyelashes from chemo, but I got some eye drops and we made it through. I did some very minor editing to the actual story because there was a slur dropped that I removed, and there is a content warning for alcohol use in here. Alright, that should be it. Enjoy. Sin in Space, Chapter 18. Dad's left ear itched. He lied it. Operator on duty will not remove headphones under any circumstances until relieved. There was a good hour before Gladys Porosky would show up to take over. Mars machine tool to Sun Lake, crackled the headset suddenly. He glanced at the clock and tapped out the message time on the log sheet in a typewriter before him. Sun Lake to Mars machine tool, I read you, GA, he said importantly. Mars machine tool to Sun Lake, message. Brenner Pharmaceutical to Mars Port, via Mars Machine Tool, Sun Lake, Pitco 3. Request reserve 2 cubic meters cushion cargo space outgoing rocket. Signed, Brenner. Repeat, 2 cubic meters. Act please, J. Tad said, Sun Lake to Mars Machine Tool, and read back painstakingly from the log. Message, Brenner Pharmaceutical to Mars Port, via Mars Machine Tool, Sun Lake, Pitco 3. Signed, Brenner. Repeat, 2 cubic meters. Received OK. T. Campbell, operator, end. Ted's fingers were flying over the typewriter keyboard. Mimi and Nick would want to know how the rocket was filling up. The trick was to delay your estimated requirements to the last possible minute, and then to reserve a little more than you thought you'd need. Reserve too early, and you might be stuck with space you couldn't fill, but had to pay for. Reserve too late, and there might be no room for your stuff until the next rocket. Mars machine tool to Sun Lake, end, said the headset. Ted started to raise Pitco's operator, the intermediate point between Sun Lake and Marsport, to boot the message on the last stage of its journey. Sun Lake to Pitco 3, he said into the mic. No answer. He went into the buzz, droning Pitco 3, Pitco 3, Pitco 3, Sun Lake. Pitco 3 to Sun Lake, I read you, came at last, mushily, through the headphones. Ted was full of 12-year-old scorn. Half a minute to act, and then probably with a mouthful of sandwich. Sun Lake to Pitco 3, he said. Message. Brenner Pharmaceutical to Marsport via Mars Machine Tool, Sun Lake, Pitco 3. Request reserve 2 cubic meters, cushion cargo space, outgoing rocket. Signed, Brenner. Repeat, 2 cubic meters. Act, please, GA. Pitco to Sun Lake, message received. Charlie Dreyer, operator, out. Tad fumed at the Pitco man's sloppiness and make-it-up-and-this-as-you-go procedure. Be a fine thing if everybody did that. Message would be garbled, short-stopped, rocket loading fouled up, people and cargoes missed their planes. He tapped out on the log sheet. Pitco operator C. Dreyer failed to follow procedure, omitted confirming repeat T. Campbell. He omitted Dreyer's irksome use of out instead of end, and the other irregularities, citing only the legally important error. That was just self-protection. If there were any errors in the final message, the weak spot on the relay could be identified. But Tad was uncomfortably certain that Dreyer, if the report ever got back to him, would consider him an interfering brat. He bet Mr. Graham's last message got respectful handling from Pitco, in spite of the pain in the neck Philip's news coat had been couched in. They all wanted Graham. Tad had received half a dozen messages for the writer extending the hospitality of this industrial colony or that. The man had good sense to stick with Sun Lake, the boy thought approvingly. There was this jam with the rocket and the commissioner, but the Sun Lakers were unquestionably the best bunch of people on Mars. Pitco to Sun Lake, said Dreyer's voice in the earphones. Sun Lake to Pitco, I read you, GA, snapped Tad. Pitco 3 to Pitco 1, message. Via Sun Lake, Mars Machine Tool, Brenner Pharmaceutical Distillery, Mars Rolling Mills. Your outgoing rocket cargo space requirements estimate need here 36 hours. Remain downhold cushion space requests minimum account, new tariff schedule. Signed Hackenberg for Reynolds. Repeat 36 hours. Act please, GA. Huh. Dreyer repeated numbers on his stuff, all right. Tad acted and booted the message on. The machine shop and the canal confluence would get it, then the drug factory in the highlands dotted with marcane weed, then the distillery among its tended fields of wire grass, then the open hearth furnaces and the rolling mills in the red taconite range, and at last Pitco 1, in the heart of the silver and copper country. He hoped he wouldn't have to handle any of Graham's long code jobs. Orders were to cooperate fully with the writer, but even Harv Stillman, who'd taken Graham's story on his rocket ship and Marsport had run into trouble with it. Tad loafed through the material to the coded piece by Graham and shuddered. It was okay, the boy supposed, for on Earth, where you didn't want somebody tapping a PTM transmission beam and getting your news story, but why did the guy have to show off on Mars, where the only way out was by rocket, and you couldn't get scooped? Marsport 18 to Pitco 3, he heard faintly in the earphones. Automatically, he ran his finger down the posted list of planes. Marsport 18 was a 4-engine freighter belonging to the Marsport Hauling Company. Pitco 3 to Marsport 18, I read you, GA. Marsport 18 to Pitco, our estimated time of arrival is 1350. 1350, we're bringing your mail, and... Pitco to Marsport 18, okay, ETA is 1350, and I'll tell Mr. Hackenberg, and... Mail, thought Tad enviously. All Sun Lake ever got was microfilmed reports from the New York office and business letters from customers. Aunt Millie and Cousin Adelbert wouldn't write you unless you wrote to them, and Sun Lake couldn't lay out cash for space mail stamps. Tad's ear itched. One thing he missed, he admitted to himself, in a burst of candor, and he'd probably have to go on missing it. The Sun Lake Society of New York couldn't spontaneously mail him the latest Captain Crusher comics. He'd read to Tatters, Volume 217, number 27, smuggled under his sweater from Earth, and to this day he hadn't figured out how the captain had escaped from the horrible jam he'd been in on page 64. There'd been a Venetian crawl brush on his right, and a Martian brownie on his left, and a Rigelian paramonster drifting through down above, and a Plutonian blood mole burrowing up from below. All the writers of Captain Crusher knew their business, thought Tad, though they certainly didn't know much about Mars, the real Mars. Their hero never seemed to need oxen or clothing any warmer than the hose and cape when on a Martian adventure, and he was always stumbling over brownies and dead cities and lost civilizations. Bunk, of course. Brownies, dead cities, and lost civilizations would make Mars a more interesting place for a kid. But when a person grows up, other things mattered more than excitement. Things like doing a good job and knowing it. Things like learning, getting along. Probably, Tad thought uncomfortably, getting married someday. Mars Machine Tool to Sun Lake. Message. Pitco 1 to Sun Lake. Mars Machine Tool, Sun Lake. Sun Lake to Mars Machine Tool, I read you, GA. Tad snapped, peeved. The operator might have waited just a second before he went into the buzz. Mars Machine Tool to Sun Lake. Message. Pitco 1 to Pitco 3. Via Rolling Mill, Distillery, Mars, Brenner Pharmaceutical, Mars Machine Tool, Sun Lake. Outgoing rocket cargo space requirements are ballast, 32 cubic meters. Braced anti-shift, 12.75 cubic meters. Glass line tank, 15 cubic meters. Cushion, 1.5 cubic meters. Regret advised, will require steerage space, 1 passenger. FYI, millwright's helper Chuck Kelly disabled by marcane addiction. The repeats followed, and Tad briskly received. He raised Pitco 3 and booted the message, grinning at the muffled "God damn it" over the headphones as he droned on the bad news about Kelly. Steerage passenger space didn't come as high as cushion cargo cubage. A steerage passenger was expected to grab a stanchion, hang on, and take his lumps during a rough landing, but it was high enough. Sun Lake couldn't afford cushion cubage, ever, and settled for braced anti-shift. Sometimes crates gave and split under the smashing accelerations, but the cash you had to lay out for cargo-protected springs, hydraulic systems, and meticulous stowage by the supercargo himself wasn't there. It meant a disgruntled customer every once in a while, but the tariffs made you play it that way. The door behind him opened and closed. "Gladys?" he asked. "You're early." "It's me, Sonny," said a man's voice. "Graham's. You mind filing a little copy for me?" The newsman handed him a couple of onion skin pages. "Phillips News Code," he said. "Think you can handle it?" "I guess so," said Tad unhappily. "We're supposed to cooperate with you." Blankly, he looked at the sheets and asked, "Why bother to code it, though?" "Saves space, for one thing. You get about 5 words for one. Green Bay, for instance, means an excited crowd gathered at the scene. 3 play means in spite of his or their opposition. And for another thing, what's the point of my knowing the code if I never use it?" He grinned to show he was kidding. Tad ignored the grin and remarked, "I thought that was it." He entered the time in the log and said into the mic, "Sun Lake to Pitco 3. Pitco Act." Sun Lake to Pitco 3, Long Phillips news code message. Sun Lake to Marsport via Pitco 3. Message, microfilm following text, and hold for arrival. Douglas Graham, Marsport, and pickup at Administration Building. Green Bay program Sun Lake stopped. Post 2, arguable fuzzers, Mars set. Brightest. Arguablest Marsing, My Face, Gin Floozers, Dopeport, Felkel, Para, Unme, Sun Lake, Hook, Focus, Cockplocked, Edders, Earth, Stop, Sap, Quizzy, Hawk, Plager, Urquick. Graham heard the last of the story go out and saw the kid note down the acknowledgement in his log. "Good job," the Gunther said. "Thanks, fella." Outside, the chilly night air fanned his face. It had been a dirty little trick to play on the boy. They'd give him hell when they found out, but the message had to clear, and that Stillman knew a little Phillips, enough to wonder and ask questions. Graham took a swig from his pocket flask and started down the street. He'd needed the drink, and he'd needed a long walk. It was surgery, he told himself, but surgery wasn't always pleasant for the surgeon. The doctor might be able to understand if he could only step back and see the thing in perspective. As it was, Tony obviously believed Mrs. Candrew's absurd story about somebody doping the beans. The writer grinned sardonically. What a cesspool Mars must be, if even these so-called idealists were so corrupted. Marcane addiction by a brand-new mother, theft of a huge quantity of Marcane clearly traced to the colony. The doctor would hate him and think him two-faced, which he was. It was part of the job. He was going to start an avalanche. A lot of people would hate him for it. An impeccable professional hatchet job on Sun Lake was the lever that would topple the boulder to start the avalanche. Senators would posture and declaim. Bills would be written and rewritten by legislative clerks, but that would be just the dust over the rumbling rocks. The public relations boys of the industrials used to be newspapermen themselves, and they would pick their way through Phillips. The word would be passed like lightning. They'd learn to their horror that it wasn't going to be a cheerful travelogue quickie like his last 2 or 3. That Graham was out for blood. The coded dispatch would be talked over and worried over in most of the Mars administrative buildings tonight. They would debate whether he was going to put the blast on all the colonies, but they'd note that he'd pinned all the guilt so far on Sun Lake, not to mention specifically that the abortion and the prostitution had occurred at Pitco. So, by tomorrow morning, he'd let one of the industrials send a plane for him. He'd been playing hard to get for 2 days. Long enough. He'd put on his jovial mask, and they'd fall over themselves, dishing the dirt on each other. He'd make it a point to pass through Brenner Pharmaceutical. Quasi-legal operators like Brenner always knew who was cutting corners. And Bell, what tills did he have his hand in? Graham knew there wasn't another newsman alive who could swing it. The first real story to come out of Mars, besides press handouts from the industrials and the planet, was rotten ripe for it. But mostly he would just scare them. He, the scoffing, good-humored know-it-all, so cheerfully sinister that they'd try to buy him off with dirt about their other outfits. He'd make no open promises, no open threats, and it all would drop into his lap the way it always had. No, not always, he corrected himself grimly. Once he'd been a green kid reporter lucky enough to break the Bell scandal. He'd actually been sorry for the crook. There'd been a lot of changes since. It was funny what happened when you got into the upper brackets. First you grabbed and grabbed. Women, a penthouse with a 2-acre living room, silk shirts built for you instead of the nylon all the paycheck stiffs wore. Beefsteaks broiled over bootleg charcoal made of real wood from one of Earth's few thousand acres of remaining trees. You grabbed and grabbed, and then you got sick of grabbing. You felt empty and blank and worked like hell to make yourself think you were happy. And then if you were lucky, you found out who you were. Graham had found out that he, the youngest one, underfed, the one the big boys ganged up on for snitching, the one the cop called a yellow little liar, the one nobody liked, the one who always got his head knucked. Yes, he had power. It was the monstrous energy of Earth's swarming billions. If you could reach them, you could have them. You could slash down what was rotten and corrupt, a thieving banker, a bribed commissioner, a Mars colony. Under the jovial mask, it hurt when they called you a sensationalist, said you were unanalytical, had no philosophy, couldn't do anything but set down facts to titillate the uncritical audience. But what you could do, and they couldn't, was stir the billions of Earth, make them laugh, make them hopeful, make them rage, and when they raged, focus their rage to a white-hot spot that cauterized a particular bit of rottenness. Graham stumbled and took a swig from his flask. Who had to have philosophy? What was wrong with exposing crackpots and crooks? The first real news story out of Mars would break up the Sun Lake colony. Some good would go with the bad. The surgeon had no choice. A Kandra woman and her baby. The child belonged on Earth, and it would go there. The little thing would never know, if not for Graham, that there was anything but Mars. I'm supposed to be hard-boiled, he thought, a little drunk and sentimental. But I know what's right for that kid. Hey, he said. Where the hell was he, anyway? Wandering in the desert, high as a kite on his expected triumph. His feet had led him down the colony street, along the path to the airfield, past it, and a few kilometers toward the Rimrock Hills. He blamed it on the Mars gravity. Your legs didn't tire, for one thing. The Radio Shack light was plain behind him, dimmer and off to the left of it, shown in the windows of the lab, merged in one beacon. The Radio Shack light went out and then on again. A moment later, so did the light from the lab. Power interruption, he said. Or I blinked. It happened again. First the Radio Shack, and then the lab. And then it happened once more. The writer took out his flask and gulped. Who's out there? He yelled. I'm Graham. There wasn't any answer, but something came whistling out of the darkness at him, striking his parka and falling to the ground. He fumbled for it while still trying to peer through the night for whatever had passed between him and the lights from Sun Lake. What do you want? He yelled into the darkness hysterically. I'm Graham, the writer. Who are you? Something whizzed at him and hit his shoulder. Cut that out! He shrieked, and began to run for the lights of Sun Lake. He had taken only a few steps when something caught at his leg, and he floundered onto the ground. The next and last thing he felt was a paralyzing blow on the back of his head.